The morning after Christmas, my hand still stings red where my stepmother, Renata, struck it for unwrapping the wrong paper, the kind reserved for family photos. My father just pointed at the spilled wine and said, "Clean it." I wiped the floor, but a different switch flipped inside me. They don't know. I just finished wiring a house on the Calder Cove Cliffs. Tonight, I'm turning on the lights for everyone they left out. My name is Tessa Rowan. I am 29 years old, and I am an industrial electrician with Union Local 214, right here in Harbor Point, Rhode Island. My hands, the ones Renata hit this morning, are not soft. They are calloused, and usually carry a faint, metallic scent of copper and conduit, a smell I've earned. I live in a rented attic apartment that leans so close to the shipyard. The windows rattle when the big gantry cranes move. The air always tastes like salt and diesel. I work the night shift, mostly, pulling heavy-gauge wire through new construction sites or troubleshooting junction boxes on the docks when the rest of the town is asleep. The hours are brutal, but the pay is good. Every extra cent goes into the Cliff House. The Cliff House is my secret, my project. It's an old, weathered cottage perched on the rocks at Calder Cove, a place people said was too beaten by storms to be saved. I bought it cheap 2 years ago. I spend my days off out there, gutting it, rewiring it from the service drop to the last outlet. It's all me. I'm saving it. Or maybe it's saving me. I haven't told my family about it. They wouldn't understand a house that wasn't for show. This Christmas, I was uninvited. The text came 2 days ago, in the family group chat that Renata curates like a press release. It was a picture of my stepsister, Celeste Vale, and her new boyfriend, some finance guy. The caption, from Renata, read, "Just an intimate family Christmas this year. So excited to have Celeste and Miles home." Just them, not me. I texted my father, Martin, separately. "Am I supposed to come by later?" His reply came back almost immediately, which meant Renata had already prepped him. "Tess, it's just not a good time. We're doing the formal pictures, and you know how Renata gets, it's better this way." It was Celeste who accidentally gave me the real reason. She sent me a private message, probably trying to be nice, but she's too much her mother's daughter. "Mom's worried the smell of machine oil from your work clothes will ruin the photos. Tessa, you know how she is about the vibe." The vibe. I stared at my hands, clean from the shower, but still stained around the cuticles. The smell of oil, the implication that my work, my life, was dirty. Something to be hidden so it wouldn't stain their perfect, sterile image. I have accepted their silence for years. I have eaten at the kids' table long after I was an adult. I have shown up, done my part, and left without making waves. I learned to be quiet. But this time, the insult wasn't just about me. It was about my work. It was about the one thing I inherited that was real. My grandfather, Donovan, was a linesman. He was my father's father. Before Renata pushed him and his mother, Evelyn, to the margins. When I was little, I didn't play with dolls. I sat on the floor of his workshop, dismantling old radios and toasters. He'd show me the transformers, the capacitors, the neat, logical flow of the circuit board. He'd let me use his soldering iron, the smell of hot metal and flux filling the air. He'd tap a big transformer with a screwdriver and say, "Electricity is lightning that listens. Tessa, you just have to know how to talk to it." He taught me how to bend conduit, how to strip wire, how to respect the current. He taught me that power wasn't about being loud. It was about being correct, connected, and grounded. For 10 years, since he died and Renata fully took over, I have been swallowing their passive-aggressive nonsense. I've let her coordinate me out of family portraits, reschedule my visits, and manage my relationship with my own father. I stayed silent, but this text, this excuse about machine oil, felt like the final strand of wire being pulled taut in an overloaded circuit. It was the last connection before the main breaker trips. Renata Val lives to coordinate the family image. That's how she describes her work. She's a former local news anchor who treats our family like a failing brand she's been hired to relaunch. Christmas isn't a holiday. It's a content gathering opportunity. Every ribbon is color matched. Every position on the couch is predetermined for optimal lighting. Every conversation is a script. She has turned our lives into a sterile, joyless photo shoot. And my father, Martin Rowan, just goes along. He's a man who has traded his spine for a quiet life. His response to everything, from Renata's casual cruelty to a literal mess on the floor, is the same. Don't make a scene, Tess. Let's not make a big deal. Just clean it up. He has become her assistant, her enabler, the one who smooths over the cracks she creates, urging everyone to just be quiet and pretend the house isn't falling down. So on Christmas Eve, while they were arranging themselves in matching plaid pajamas for their intimate celebration, I was sitting in my truck, parked on the gravel shoulder overlooking Calder Cove. The cliff house was dark against the horizon. I opened my phone. I scrolled past the Vale Rowan family group chat, past Martin and Celeste. I went deep into my contact list. First, I called Aunt Moira, my mother's sister. Renata hates her, calls her brassy. Moira's a nurse who laughs too loud and speaks her mind. So she was exiled from holidays 5 years ago. She picked up on the second ring. Tessa? Merry Christmas. Kid, you okay? Yeah, Aunt Mo. I'm great. What are you doing tomorrow night? Nothing that a bottle of cheap wine can't fix. Why? Can you come to Calder Cove? I've got a place. I'll text you the address. Calder Cove? Since when? Hell yes. I'll be there. Need me to bring anything? Just you? Next, I called my cousin Ian. He's a mechanic. His hands are permanently black under the nails. He was the one who told me about the opening at the Union. He got disinvited from Thanksgiving 3 years ago after he called Renata's curated cheese board pretentious. Yo, Tess, Merry Christmas. Hey, Ian, you and the kids busy tomorrow night? Just the usual. Chinese takeout and arguing over what movie to watch. What's up? I'm hosting a dinner at my place, on the Cove. There was a pause. Your place? You finally finished it? Almost. It's warm, and the lights work. That's all that matters. We're there, he said, his voice warm. You need me to bring the kids? Of course, all of you. Last, I called Grandma Evelyn, my father's mother, the woman Renata replaced. She lives in a small apartment downtown, surrounded by photos of my grandfather and me. Renata says she's stuck in the past and doesn't fit the new family dynamic. Tessa, my girl, what a surprise. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Grandma, are you free tomorrow for dinner? Oh, honey, I don't want to impose on your father's day. You're not. It's not at their house. It's at mine. I told her about the cliff house. I told her I'd been fixing it up. Her voice got thick. Donovan would have loved that. He always said that house had good bones. It does, I said, looking at its dark shape. Can you come? I'll pick you up. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Tessa. I hung up the phone. The salt spray misted my windshield. Inside my chest, a new circuit was closing. The decision was made. I was done sitting in the dark. Done being the person who was too much or not enough for their picture. I was going to host a dinner at the Cliff House. I was going to set a long table for everyone who had been pushed aside, forgotten, or told they were too dirty to be part of the vibe. There would be no assigned seats, no color-coordinated napkins, and no scripted moments. I was going to turn on the lights, and at my table, everyone gets a seat. I went anyway, on Christmas morning, December 25th. I drove to my father's house. I told myself I was just dropping off gifts for Celeste and my father, the ones I had bought weeks ago. It was a stupid hope, a reflex I thought I had trained out of myself. The house was silent, which meant a photo shoot was in progress. Renata's rules. The living room was staged in white and gold. The tree was perfect, sterile, more of an installation than a celebration. Celeste was aiming a new camera, a heavy black thing, at my father and Renata, who were posed on the white sofa, holding matching mugs, smiling at nothing. I set my gifts down quietly by the door. Renata's eyes snapped to me. Tessa, You're late, and you're not dressed for the aesthetic. I was wearing my work jeans and a clean wool sweater. Merry Christmas, Renata. I saw a small gift under the tree, wrapped in plain brown paper, addressed to Celeste. The ribbon was falling off. An old instinct kicked in, the one to fix things, to make them neat. I knelt and retied the bow. As I did, my hand brushed against a roll of exquisite gold leaf paper Renata kept for special gifts. I saw a tear in the paper on a nearby box, and without thinking, I reached for a small scrap of the gold paper to patch it, to make it look right. "Do not touch that." Her voice cut through the silence. I froze. "It's just a piece of..." "That paper is for the photographs. Tessa, it's a prop. You can't just handle it. You don't understand the cohesion." She was walking towards me, fast. She grabbed the heavy cardboard tube from the center of the wrapping paper roll. "You always ruin the aesthetic. You and that smell." She swung the tube. It wasn't a lazy tap. It was a strike. The hard edge caught me directly across the back of my hand and wrist. A sharp, hot pain that felt like a jolt of stray voltage. The impact made me jerk. I had been holding a glass of red wine. Renata had pressed it into my hand the moment I walked in, saying, "At least look festive." Now, the glass slipped. It hit the floor and shattered. A dark, spreading stain of Cabernet on the immaculate, snow-white rug. Silence. My father, Martin, finally moved. He stood up from the sofa. He didn't look at my hand, which was already swelling. He didn't look at Renata, who was breathing hard, her eyes bright with fury. He just looked down at the stain. He pointed a finger at the spill. "Clean it." My wrist throbbed. The humiliation was a cold, clean shock. I knelt, the shards of glass glittering in the wine. My phone was in my back pocket. I slid it out, keeping it low, shielding it with my body. My thumb found the voice memo icon. I tapped it. The timer started. 0001, 0002. I angled the phone's microphone toward the center of the room, resting it on the carpet just behind the leg of the coffee table. I needed this. I needed the audio file. I needed to hear the tone, the cold, flat lack of care. Celeste lowered her new camera. She sighed, an exaggerated sound of annoyance. "Ugh, the set is ruined," she said, her voice clear in the quiet room. "Mom, the lighting is all off now." Her complaint, so perfectly indifferent, was captured by the recording. As I dabbed at the wine with a napkin, my head down, I heard the electronic chime of the doorbell. A delivery. Maybe. The sound triggered a thought. The doorbell. The smart camera I had installed for my father 2 years ago. The one he could never figure out. It was cloud-based. It recorded video and audio of the entire front porch and driveway. It would have my arrival. It might have the argument. It was a digital logbook. I still had the admin password saved in my phone. It was an entry point. Renata leaned down, her face close to mine. Her voice was a venomous whisper, perfectly audible to my phone's microphone. "Stop it. Stop trying to pull sympathy. Tessa, you are an outsider here. You don't belong in this picture. Act like it." My father cleared his throat, the first sound he had made since his command. "It's a beautiful day," he said, his voice artificially light. "Let's not spoil it. Let's just reset." He turned to me, still on my knees. "Tessa, the gift bags from last night are piling up in the garage. Go take the trash out to the curb." It was a dismissal, a chore for the help. I stood up slowly. My hand was a deep, angry red. I picked up my phone, stopping the recording as I slid it into my pocket. I didn't look at any of them. I just walked to the garage, the way he had pointed. The garage was cold and smelled of plastic and old oil. By the side door, clear plastic storage bins were stacked high. They were all labeled with Renata's precise, printed stickers. One said, "Christmas decor, for press photos." Another, "Gifts, for staging only." A third, "Table linens, winter narrative." It wasn't a family. It was a production. a marketing campaign for a life that didn't exist. My phone vibrated. I looked down, expecting another text in the family group chat, but it was a new message, from a different number. It was Grandma Evelyn. "Is your door open?" I stood in the cold garage, the evidence of their manufactured life all around me. I looked at the red welt on my hand. I thought of the cliff house, dark and waiting. I typed back one word, always. I didn't go back inside the house. There was nothing there for me. I walked out the garage side door, got into my truck, and backed out of the driveway. I didn't slam the door. I didn't speed off. There was no need for noise. I knew, with the certainty of a perfectly grounded circuit, that I didn't need their stage anymore. I had my own. I was going to turn on the lights. I drove away from the white rug and the spilled wine, the throb in my hand a dull metronome against the steering wheel. I left Harbor Point proper, taking the coast road out toward the spit. The closer I got, the more the air changed. The scent of pine and curated mulch from my father's neighborhood gave way to the raw, wet rock smell of the Atlantic. The wind buffeted the truck, a clean, cold force that seemed to scrub the morning's humiliation from the air. I turned onto the gravel track that leads to Calder Cove, and there it was. The Cliff House. It isn't beautiful by Renata's standards. It is raw. The frame is old-growth timber, weathered by 100 years of northeasters to a silver gray. It doesn't fight the cliff. It clings to it, an extension of the rock itself. The entire western face is a wall of new, triple-pane glass I'd installed with Ian's help, angled directly at the churning water below. The wind was high, and the salt spray was a living mist, coating the glass, tasting of brine and distance. This house had faced down storms my family would disintegrate in. It was still standing. I parked the truck, grabbed my tools, and went inside. The smell inside was sawdust, new paint, and the faint, clean ozone of a freshly wired panel. This was my sanctuary, and I had built it from the studs out. The electrical system was my masterpiece. Back in the utility room, I opened the main panel. It was perfect. No chaotic rat's nest. Every wire was run at a clean 90-degree angle, bundled, and labeled in my own sharp print. The thick copper ground wire, shined to a dull gleam, ran deep into the earth. This house was grounded, safe. The wires ran through the walls like a circulatory system, a set of copper veins carrying the life I was pumping into it. Across the room, a set of deep cycle batteries sat in their rack, connected to a large inverter, my uninterruptible power supply. I'd spent $2,000 on that setup. If the winter ice took down the power lines, this house wouldn't even flicker. It would hold its own light, independent and steady. In the main room, I flipped a switch. The recessed lighting I'd spent a week mapping came to life. Not the harsh, sterile blue-white of Renata's photo-ready living room, but a warm, 3,000 Kelvin glow that made the wooden floors look like honey. This was the art of the current, control, safety, power that listened. The main room was one open space. The kitchen was minimal, all brushed stainless steel in function. I'd salvaged the counters from a restaurant supply auction. They were scarred, clean, and indestructible. There were no delicate surfaces here, nothing you couldn't put a hot pan on, but the centerpiece of the room, the reason I'd redesigned the entire floor plan, was the table. It was made of reclaimed oak from an old shipyard. It was massive, running nearly the length of the room. It could seat 16 people, maybe 18 if we squeezed. I had sanded it for 3 days, my hands vibrating, until the grain felt like scarred, smoothed over skin. I'd left the imperfections, the old bolt holes, the dark water stains, the history. There was no head of the table, and there would be no kids' table, that ultimate symbol of family segregation, of being not quite good enough to sit with the adults. This was one table, for everyone. I walked to the heavy front door, its wood still smelling of the spar varnish I'd used to seal it against the salt. I hung the sign I'd carved last winter, during the long nights after my shift. It was a simple piece of driftwood. In its center, I had carefully, deeply carved 3 words. Everyone gets a seat. I ran my fingers over the letters. This was the rule of my house. My bookshelves didn't hold curated novels with matching spines. My art was my trade. I had my grandfather Donovan's old books, antique circuit diagrams from the 1950s, old fuse catalogs with detailed illustrations, his original, leather-bound copy of the National Electrical Code from 1971. Next to them was my own library, every edition of the NFPA handbook since I'd started my apprenticeship, manuals on low-voltage lighting, solar array design, and residential load calculation. This was the history of my craft, the physics of safety, the art of bringing lightning indoors and making it behave. The sun was already starting to dip, the winter light fading fast. I still had work to do. I went back out onto the porch, the wind pulling at my jacket. I opened a box of Edison bulbs, the ones with the intricate, warm filaments. I began stringing them along the heavy-duty cable I'd secured to the eaves. My fingers were stiff from the cold, but the work was familiar. I twisted each bulb into its weatherproof socket, the feel of the thread catching the brass a small, satisfying connection. This was the last circuit I needed to test. I'd buried a small dusk-to-dawn sensor near the steps. As the sky deepened from gray to indigo, I finished the last bulb. I stood back, my tools in my pocket, and waited. The air grew colder, the ocean roared, and then, as if by magic, the sensor detected the absence of light. A relay clicked. The entire porch glowed to life. The Edison bulbs lit up, a string of warm, golden light against the violent blue of the twilight. They weren't harsh. They were welcoming. They threw a soft perimeter of safety and warmth onto the dark cliff edge. They were a beacon. I smiled, the first real smile all day. I went inside, stamping the cold from my feet, and pulled out my phone. It was time to build the guest list. My first call was to Rafi, Chef Rafi Moreno. I'd met him pulling cable for a new studio kitchen he was consulting on. He was the only chef I'd ever met who knew the difference between a NEMA receptacle and a standard outlet. He was loud, brilliant, and respected the trades. He picked up, "Tessa, do not tell me that walk-in freezer is tripping the breaker again." "Not this time, chef," I said. "I'm calling with a job, a private one. Tonight, at my place." "Tonight? On Christmas? It better pay double time." "I need food, warm food, for about 15 people. Seafood, maybe something that sticks to your ribs. I can pay." There was a pause. "A party? At your new place? The one you've been hiding?" "It's not a party. It's a dinner. For people who got left out. Real food. Rafi, not props." He laughed. A big, booming sound. "Say no more. I've got 3 gallons of smoked clam chowder base in my fridge and a hell of a lot of bread. It's a Christmas miracle. Text me the address. I'm coming. And I'm not charging you a damn thing. But you owe me a look at my HVAC." "Done," I said, my throat tight. "Thank you, Rafi." I was texting him the address when there was a soft knock on the door. I froze. Nobody knew I was here. I opened it, on the porch, lit by my new string of lights, stood Nora Pike, my only neighbor, a widow in her 60s who lived in the only other house on the cove. She was wrapped in a huge parka and held a small, countertop convection oven in her arms. "I saw the lights, dear," she said, her voice thin in the wind. "I figured you were finally finished. I know you don't have a proper stove in there yet." She pointed at the one in her hands. "This is a good little toaster oven. Gets hotter than you'd think." She also held a small tin. "And I made these seaweed and sesame savory crackers. They're good with cheese." I stared at her, this small woman offering me an oven. "Nora, thank you." "Oh, hush. We're the only ones crazy enough to live on this rock. We stick together." She bustled past me and set the oven on the stainless steel counter. "Smells like new wire in here. Good for you." After she left, I got to work on my own contributions. I hadn't bought gifts for Renata or my father this year, but I had gifts for my real family. I found the old wooden chisel I'd been refinishing. I'd spent hours getting the edge perfect. It was for Gus Alvarez, my journeyman mentor, the man who taught me how to read a 3-phase diagram, I wrapped it in a clean shop rag. For Grandma Evelyn, I had a thick, hand-knitted wool scarf I'd bought from a local weaver. The color of the sea on a gray day. Warmth, protection. I had kept this house a secret from my family. I'd been working on it for 2 years, hoarding my money, spending my nights and weekends here, pulling wire, hanging drywall, learning to plumb from videos online. Renata and Martin thought I was just working extra shifts at the shipyard. The dirty daughter, they had no idea I was building this. I hadn't kept it secret out of shame. I'd kept it secret because it was mine. It wasn't a prop for their family narrative. I finished wrapping the gifts. The house was warm. The lights were on. The oven was preheating, and the sound of the ocean was a roar of approval. I had kept this place dark and hidden, but I was done with that. Tonight, the truth was going to shine. They'd see it from the main road if they bothered to look. The light began to change just before 5 o'clock. The winter sun, low and weak for most of the day, finally gave up. But instead of just fading to black, the sky over Calder Cove performed an act of quiet defiance. The churning, gray ocean and the heavy clouds seemed to tear open, and the horizon bled out in a sheet of metallic, polished silver. The last light hit the waves and shattered, not into warmth, but into a bright, cold, and beautiful clarity. The wind from the sea was sharp, but it was no longer just salt and rock. From the open door of the cliff house, a new smell was rolling out to greet it. Rafi Moreno had arrived, not in a chef's coat, but in a Carhartt jacket and a beanie, carrying 2 massive, insulated catering containers. He had taken over my stainless steel counter, and now the entire house was filled with the impossibly rich aroma of garlic, browning, and butter, and the sweet, sharp note of roasted oranges and thyme. "It's a chowder base, Tessa," he'd announced, plugging in his own immersion blender. "But you gotta build the layers. You don't just make chowder, you convince it to happen." I just watched, feeling a wave of gratitude so strong it almost buckled my knees. The house was no longer just a well-wired box, it was a home. They started to arrive, not in a parade, but scattered, like people finding their own way in the dusk. The headlights of my aunt's old Subaru were the first I saw, cutting through the twilight on the gravel path. Aunt Moira burst in, her arms full of bakery boxes. "I didn't know what you needed, so I brought 3 kinds of pie," she declared, her voice filling the space. "Apple, blueberry, and one of those fancy pecan things. Tessa, what have you done here? This place is magnificent." She didn't wait for an answer, just hugged me, hard, and I could smell the faint, clean scent of hospital soap from her shift. Then, my truck. I had gone to pick up Grandma Evelyn. She stepped out, wrapped in the new wool scarf, and just stood for a full minute, looking at the house, her hand on her throat. The little Edison bulbs on the porch lit the weathered lines of her face. "Donovan would have given you the keys to the city for this. Tessa," she whispered. "He always loved this spot. He said the sea here had character." Ian arrived next in his big work van, the side door sliding open to release his 2 kids, 9 and 7, who shot out like miniature tornadoes. "Tessa, you have rocks. Can we climb the rocks?" Ian just grinned, holding a case of beer under one arm and a bag of juice boxes in the other. "This is insane. Tess, in the best way. Kids, get your coats off. And no, you cannot climb the rocks in the dark." Gus Alvarez, my old mentor, came with Nora Pike. He'd apparently given her a ride. He, a man of few words, just walked in, looked at my main panel, and nodded once. "Clean work, Rowan, good grounding," coming from him. It was the highest praise. Nora, meanwhile, was already helping Rafi, her savory crackers laid out on a platter she'd brought from her own kitchen. Finally, my co-workers from the shipyard, Kaya and Devin, showed up. Kaya. Another electrician in our local held up a bottle of dark rum. We figured it was a warm liquids kind of night. Devin, quieter, was carrying a worn guitar case. The long table was suddenly full. People pulled up the mismatched chairs I'd collected. Ian's kids squeezed onto a bench, and a real, vibrant, chaotic noise filled the room. It was the clink of glasses, the boom of Rafi's laugh, Aunt Moira telling a loud story about a patient, and under it all, the constant, rhythmic crash of the waves outside. I stood at the end of the table, just watching. Everyone was talking, passing Nora's crackers, filling glasses. There was no pressure, no posing. No one was checking their phone for the right angle. Aunt Moira raised her glass. To Tessa, for building the best damn house on the Rhode Island coast. Everyone cheered, and I felt my face flush. I didn't have a speech. That wasn't my way. I just raised my own glass of water. Thanks for coming, I said. My voice was a little rough. I'm glad you're here. Devin, unasked, had opened his guitar case. He sat on a stool by the window, and as the chatter died down, he began to play. It wasn't a performance, it was just chords, a simple, acoustic melody that wove itself into the sound of the wind and the ocean. It was the one-man band he'd promised, and it was perfect. We ate. Rafi's chowder was a revelation, thick, smoky with clams, and so warm it felt like it was healing me from the inside. Nora poured hot, mulled cider from a pot on the stove, the smell of cinnamon and allspice filling the air. We passed bread. We laughed. At one point, Grandma Evelyn, sitting beside me, put her small, dry hand over mine on the table. Her touch was light, but it held me in place. I looked at her. Her eyes were bright, scanning the long, loud, happy table. Tessa, she said, her voice quiet but clear. This is the first Christmas I've been to in 15 years that doesn't feel like it has a scorecard. She squeezed my hand, the one that was still bruised from the wrapping paper tube. You did a good thing here, child. A necessary thing. Down the table, Gus was holding Ian's kids spellbound. He wasn't telling them a normal fairy tale. He was explaining how an H-bridge circuit worked, using 2 forks and a knife to show how you could reverse the polarity of a motor. And that, he said, tapping the knife, is how you make the robot go backwards. It's just about controlling the path. The kids were watching him like he was a magician. Kaya was in a deep, nerdy argument with Ian about the benefits of marine-grade conduit versus standard PVC. Aunt Moira was telling Nora a story that made her laugh so hard she had to wipe her eyes. It was real. Then, I saw Kaya pull out her phone. She wasn't staging a shot. She just held it up for a moment, capturing the scene. The long, candle-lit table, the silhouettes of heads against the black glass of the window, the sea invisible but roaring just beyond the light. She recorded for maybe 20 seconds. I watched her type for a moment, smile, and put her phone away. I didn't think about it again until my own phone, which I'd left on the counter, buzzed, and buzzed again, and again, a rapid, angry vibration that was completely out of place in this room. I picked it up. It wasn't the main family chat. It was a new one, a splinter group, one with cousins and aunts that Renata didn't approve of. Someone had forwarded Kaya's post. The post was simple. It was the 20-second video clip, the sound of Devin's guitar, the laughter, the view of the table, and her caption, simple and devastating, found the real table. The messages in the splinter chat were exploding. Where is that? Is that Tessa's house? I didn't know she had a house. Wait, I thought everyone was at Martin and Renata's? That looks like Aunt Moira. And Evelyn? Tessa is having her own Christmas? The vibration in my hand suddenly changed, a direct text, from Celeste. What are you doing? Then a text from my father. Tessa, this is not helpful. You're making things difficult. And then, the main Vale Rowan family group chat, the one Renata curated, lit up. A cousin I hadn't seen in years had apparently posted Kaya's video in there. The real table video was now in Renata's pristine living room, digitally speaking. The messages were a flood. What is this? Tessa, what's going on? I stood there, in the warmth of my kitchen, the phone vibrating in my hand like a trapped, angry thing. I could feel the cold shock of their outrage, their confusion that I had dared to build something of my own, to be happy without their permission. I looked at the table. Rafi was bringing out the pie. Devin was starting a new song. Grandma Evelyn was laughing. I put my phone on the counter and turned it face down. I didn't post anything. I didn't reply. I didn't defend myself. I let the light from my house, the light I had strung with my own 2 hands, do the talking. I walked back to my chair, picked up a clean plate, and held it out for a piece of pie. The morning of December 26th. The Cliff House was quiet. It was the good kind of quiet, born of peace, not fear. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky the color of washed steel. I was on my 3rd cup of coffee, sitting at the long oak table with Grandma Evelyn. We were just watching the waves, the house wrapped in the comfortable silence of a job well done. The scent of pine from the porch and old coffee hung in the air. Then the silence was broken. My phone, lying face down on the counter, began to vibrate. It wasn't a gentle buzz. It was a frantic, angry rattle against the stainless steel, a mechanical seizure. It was the sound of the outside world, the world I had blocked, trying to shatter the glass. Evelyn looked at me. "I suppose the narrative is feeling threatened," she said, her voice dry. I didn't move. I just watched it vibrate. Martin. The screen lit up with his name. It rang, and finally went to voicemail. A second later, it buzzed with a new text message. I didn't have to look, but I did. It was Celeste. "Cheap? A cheap stunt. You think you're so much better than us." I read the words. Cheap stunt, as if the 2 years of nights and weekends, the thousands of feet of wire I'd pulled, the calluses I'd earned, were all just a performance for her benefit, as if the joy on Aunt Moira's face, or the peace I saw in Evelyn, was a stunt. The phone immediately began to ring again. Martin. I felt the old familiar reflex. Don't answer. Let it pass. Clean it up. Don't make a scene. I looked at Evelyn. Her eyes were clear, steady. They held no judgment, only a deep, quiet understanding. She had been exiled by these people, too. "I'm done hiding in the dark, Grandma," I said, my voice quiet. "I know, dear," she said. "Sometimes you have to be the one to flip the main breaker." I picked up the phone. I walked to the table and set it down. Right in the center, on the solid oak. I tapped the screen, accepting the call, but before I did, my thumb moved, almost by itself, to the icon from yesterday, the voice memo. The little red circle lit up. The timer started. Then I hit the speakerphone button. The air in the quiet room crackled to life. "Tessa? Tessa, are you there? What do you think you're—" My father's voice, flustered, weak. He was cut off. "Give me the phone! Martin!" Renata's voice, sharp and high, a shrill alarm. "Tessa Rowan, you listen to me. What you did was disgusting, absolutely disgusting." I sipped my coffee. I said nothing. The sound of the ocean, roaring 60 feet below, filled the pause. "Are you even listening?" she shrieked. "You have made us a laughingstock. A laughingstock. We have to go to the congregational brunch this morning. Do you have any idea what people are saying? That video. Found the real table. You embarrassed your father. You embarrassed Celeste. You deliberately tried to humiliate this family." "This family," I noted, "seems to have a very fragile public image." My father's voice broke in, desperate, trying to smooth, to clean it up. "Tess, honey, that's not constructive. What you did, you broke the narrative, the family narrative. We had a plan for the holidays. It was supposed to be quiet, and I wasn't in it," I finished for him. I looked at Evelyn, who was watching the phone as if it were a small, venomous snake. I wasn't in the plan. I wasn't in the narrative, so I made my own. "You made a table for rejects," Renata spat. "You invited Moira and Evelyn. You brought all the people we've moved past." "You mean the people you pushed out," I said, my voice staying low. The phone's microphone was good. It would be picking up everything. I just invited the people you forgot, Renata. And then, the slip, the mistake, the truth she had held under pressure for so long that it had to burst out. Forgot? She screamed. The audio must have peaked. A digital distortion. Forgot? We didn't forget. Tessa, it's called curation. We curated the image. You can't just have that. You can't have muddy boots and grease under your fingernails in the picture. Manual labor belongs out of frame. It's just cleaner. There it was, the audio file, the truth. Manual labor belongs out of frame. The reason I wasn't welcome, the reason my work, my grandfather's work, was dirty. I glanced at my phone. The red light was on. The timer was climbing. 2 minutes, 14 seconds. Before I could even respond, another voice filled the room. It was deep, it was slow, and it was full of an authority that Renata had never possessed, and my father had long since abdicated. Enough. It was Grandma Evelyn. She hadn't moved. She was still sitting in her chair, but she had leaned forward, speaking directly at the phone. The line went silent. Not a mechanical silence, but a human one. A shocked, breathless pause. They had not expected her. They had forgotten, in their self-contained narrative, that she had a voice. Evelyn continued, her words as steady and powerful as the tide. Renata, I have listened to you bully my son and my granddaughter for 10 years. I have watched you turn a family into a marketing campaign. Evelyn, this is not... Martin started. Be quiet. Martin, Evelyn snapped, and he was. You two are obsessed with the frame, with how things look. You've spent a decade polishing the glass, and you let the house fall down. You're worried about your congregation? She laughed. A short, sharp, humorless sound. My granddaughter, she said, and her voice softened for a second. This girl you call dirty, she lights up a whole city. She keeps the hospital you go to running. She keeps the shipyards you brag about living near from going dark. She builds things that work. And all you two do, all you've ever done, is polish the frame. No one spoke. The silence that followed was so complete, so total, that I could hear the tiny click of the phone's processor. It was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of a foundation cracking, the sound of their self-assurance, their rightness, their narrative, finally breaking under a load it could no longer bear. In that silence, I heard the wind whistle around the new seals on the window, and the distant cry of a gull, the real world, holding its breath. Renata had no script for this. My father had no way to clean it up. Their shared delusion had been punctured by 2 words. Enough. I let the silence sit there for a full 10 seconds. I let them suffocate in it. Then I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the end call button. I spoke, and my voice was my own. It was calm. It was grounded. It was final. My table always has a seat, I said, speaking into the void. For anyone, even you, but only if you come to listen, not to direct. I pressed the red button. The call ended. The room was quiet again, but this time, it was a different quiet. It was the quiet of victory. I looked at my phone, voice memo, 2 minutes, 58 seconds. I tapped save. I labeled it, December 26th, the frame. Evelyn reached across the table and put her hand on my wrist, the one that was still bruised, a faint yellow and purple under the skin. Well, she said, a small, fierce smile playing on her lips. I believe that breaker is well and truly tripped. For 2 days. The silence was a cold, heavy blanket. The phone was quiet. No more texts. No more calls. I knew this wasn't peace. It was rearmament. Renata and my father weren't reflecting. They were reloading. They were in their immaculate living room. Curating a new response. Polishing a new weapon. I just went to work. Pulling wire at a new commercial site. The familiar, physical ache in my shoulders a welcome distraction. The counterattack came on the 3rd day. Not with a bang, but with a folded piece of cream-colored stationery in my mailbox. It was from the Calder Cove Homeowners Association. I stood on my porch, the wind whipping my hair, and read the letter. It was a formal warning. My property, it stated, was in violation of community bylaws. My unapproved exterior lighting, the string of Edison bulbs, was a source of significant light pollution and had to be removed within 48 hours. Furthermore, the letter noted credible reports of large, unauthorized, and disruptive gatherings at my address, which violated the residential use-only clause. I read it twice. Light pollution, my little half-watt, shielded Edison bulbs, in a house perched on a cliff edge, where the only thing to pollute was the North Atlantic, disruptive gatherings, a dinner with my grandmother and a chef. This wasn't a standard bylaw complaint. This was a targeted strike. This had Renata's fingerprints all over it, her perfume of petty, weaponized bureaucracy. I was still holding the letter when my phone rang. It was Devin. "Hey, Rowan, you good? Heard you had some family drama." "You could say that," I said, the paper crinkling in my fist. "Now it's HOA drama. They're telling me to pull down my porch lights for light pollution in the fog, on a cliff." Devin was quiet for a second. He's a shop steward. He lives and breathes rules and procedure. "That sounds like crap. Tess, bylaws can't just be whatever they feel like. There's a process. Ask them to cite the specific rule, and more importantly, request the public meeting minutes from their last board meeting. Any new complaint or policy has to be discussed. It's your right as a resident. See who brought it up." "Request the minutes," I repeated. It was solid. It was a place to start. "Good idea. Devin, thanks." "Unions, HOAs, they're all just groups of people," he said. "The rules are supposed to be a shield for everyone, not a sword for a few. Go get 'em." I spent the next 2 hours on a deep dive. I wasn't just a wire puller. I was an industrial electrician. My job is to read complex, tedious, 10,000-page technical manuals and find the one sentence that matters. This was no different. I pulled up the Calder Cove HOA charter. It was, as I'd suspected, a boilerplate document. I found the section on exterior lighting. It was vague. All exterior lighting must be harmonious with the community's aesthetic and must not create a nuisance. There was no mention of light pollution, no specific lumens, no color temperature, no cutoff angles. My lights, warm and low, were far less polluting than the harsh blue floodlights on some of the other houses. The nuisance was the weapon. Renata had provided the complaint. The HOA was providing the muscle. Then I pulled up the public-facing website for the HOA. The board members were listed. The president was a man named Harrison Croft. The name was generic, but it snagged in my brain. Where had I heard it? I cross-referenced the name. Harrison Croft, Harbor Point. I found him. He was a wealth manager, and his professional bio listed the boards he sat on, the committees he chaired, and then, at the bottom, his legal representation. He was a major client at the law firm of Vale and Associates. Celeste's firm. My blood went cold. This wasn't just Renata complaining to a neighbor. This was a coordinated move. Renata complains to Harrison Croft. Croft, a client of the firm where Celeste is a partner, sees an opportunity to do a favor for the family of a valued colleague. It was a closed loop, a perfectly insulated circuit of privilege. The problem was, I couldn't prove it. It was a connection, but it wasn't evidence. The evidence arrived the next morning, delivered by Renata herself. She forwarded me an email chain. She was so confident, so smug, that she hadn't bothered to clean it up. She had overplayed her hand. Her message was on top. "Tessa, see? I told Martin this would happen. The community is very upset. You need to take those lights down immediately and stop this. Whatever it is you're doing, you're embarrassing the whole family." And below it, the whole, beautiful, idiotic chain. Renata, writing to Harrison Croft, the HOA president. "Harrison, so good to see you at the club. I'm writing about a delicate family matter." And then, Harrison's reply to Renata. Renata, consider it handled. We'll send a formal notice. Happy to help. And the fatal, stupid mistake. Harrison Croft had CC'd Celeste Vale on his reply, his lawyer. And then, Celeste's reply all, the one that proved everything. Thanks, Harrison. Appreciate you handling this discreetly. We're all just trying to maintain the family's image right now. Subject: maintaining the family's image. I saved the email as a PDF. I saved it 3 times. This was the blueprint of the conspiracy. I now had the audio of Renata saying, "Manual labor belongs out of frame." I had the email chain of her, Celeste, and the HOA president conspiring to silence me, using my stepsister's legal connections to do it. But I needed the final piece. I needed to show why they were so obsessed with the image. I logged into the admin account for the smart doorbell at my father's house. My password still worked. They hadn't even thought to change it. I went to the date. December 24th, Christmas Eve. The night I was uninvited, I scrolled through the event log and found the file. Motion detected at front door. I downloaded the video file. I hit play. It was 2 hours of footage. It was Renata, Martin, and Celeste, on their own front porch, under the perfect lights. It wasn't a family. It was a photo shoot. Martin, for God's sake, hold the mug higher. It looks like you're smelling it. Celeste, your smile is too wide. It's not warm. It's manic. Pull it back. No, Martin, that's your bad side. Turn. We practiced this. They were arranging and rearranging props, plaid blankets, gift-wrapped boxes, the 4 press photos boxes, a vintage sled. At one point, Renata brought out a stack of books with religious-sounding titles and placed them on the porch swing. It was all there. The narrative, the image, the lie. I saved the file. I was sitting at my long table, all the files open on my laptop, when Grandma Evelyn came in from her walk. She saw the look on my face, the digital evidence spread out like a battle plan. They pushed back, she said. It wasn't a question. They did. I told her about the HOA, the light pollution, the email. She just nodded, a grim set to her jaw. She went to her purse and took out a folded piece of paper. I thought this might be useful one day. I kept it. She handed it to me. It was a receipt, an invoice from Harbor Point Electrical Supply, followed by a carbon copy of a work order. Emergency service call. Hurricane damage. Full panel inspection and secondary ground wire replacement. The address was Martin Rowan's. The date was from the big hurricane last year, the one that knocked out power for 3 days, and at the bottom, the payment record. Paid in full, $4,200, paid by Tessa Rowan. I remembered that weekend. My father and Renata had evacuated to a spa upstate, but they had called me, frantic, because the power was out and the sump pump wasn't working. I had driven there in the middle of the storm. I'd waded into their flooded basement. I'd worked for 12 hours straight, pumping it out and rewiring the panel myself to get the pump back on a generator. I'd paid for the replacement parts out of my own savings. The dirty daughter, the one who belonged out of frame, the one who had literally kept their precious, curated house from sinking into the mud. The script was flipped. I had all the pieces, the audio, the email, the video, the receipt. It was a complete circuit, and the current was about to flow. I drafted a formal letter to the Calder Cove HOA board. I requested a full public hearing to appeal the violation notice. I cited my rights as a resident under the HOA charter. And then I invited everyone. I didn't just send it to the board. I CC'd every single resident in Calder Cove whose email I could find in the public directory. I CC'd Nora Pike. I forwarded it to Rafi, to Gus, to Ian and Moira, to Devin and Kaya. I invited them all to attend the public hearing. I didn't want to humiliate them. I didn't want to sue them. I didn't want revenge. Not in the way Renata would understand it. I just wanted to turn on the lights. In my house, a switch brings warmth and safety. In that hearing, a switch was going to bring the truth. I was going to lay all my evidence on the table, not in a dark, spiteful text, but in a public forum, under the fluorescent lights of the community hall, for everyone to see. The community hall smelled of stale coffee and industrial-grade carpet cleaner. It was a room designed for beige, bureaucratic boredom. But tonight, it was electric. The Calder Cove HOA monthly meeting, usually attended by maybe 6 people, was packed. Every folding chair was taken. Nora Pike had done her job, and the email I sent had done the rest. Residents I'd only ever seen checking their mail were here, lining the walls, their arms crossed, curious and vaguely annoyed. They smelled blood in the water. At the front, at the folding table, sat Harrison Croft. And in the front row, looking like they were awaiting a favorable verdict they had already purchased, sat Renata and Celeste. Celeste was scrolling through her phone, projecting an air of bored, legal importance. Renata was staring straight ahead, her face set in a mask of pleasant, concerned civic duty. They were so confident. They believed the rules were made for people like them, by people like them. They believed the manual labor would just get scared, roll over, and turn the lights off. My contingent sat in the second row, Grandma Evelyn, quiet and straight-backed as a circuit judge, Aunt Moira, who looked like she was barely restraining herself from starting a riot, Gus, Ian, Rafi, Devin, and Kaya, a line of denim and work-worn flannel that was a stark contrast to the front row's cashmere. Croft banged a small, absurd wooden gavel. The meeting is called to order. We have one item of new business on the appeal docket, complaint number 724, regarding property violations at the Cliff House. He said the name with a faint, dismissive sneer. The board received credible complaints regarding non-compliant exterior lighting and significant noise disruption. Ms. Rowan, you appealed. The floor is yours. I stood up. I walked to the front of the room, carrying a stack of papers and my laptop. I set the laptop on the table, not looking at Renata. I looked at Harrison Croft. Good evening. Mr. Croft? Good evening, everyone. I'm Tessa Rowan. I own the Cliff House. I spoke calmly, the way I do when I'm explaining a complex system to a client. I'll address the noise complaint first. As it's the simplest, the disruptive gathering was a Christmas dinner for 12 people. I'd like to ask my neighbor, Ms. Nora Pike, who lives closest, if she was disturbed. Nora stood up. Her voice was thin but carried. Harrison, I live maybe 30 yards from Tessa. I was at the dinner. The only noise I heard was a man playing an acoustic guitar, and it was lovely, if that's a violation. You'll have to fine me for listening to the radio too loudly last Tuesday. A few neighbors chuckled. Croft frowned. Thank you, Nora. But the primary complaint is the lighting. It's a severe source of light pollution. A breach of the aesthetic, I interrupted, my voice sharp. I know. I brought the schematics. I handed a copy to Croft and the other 2 board members. You'll see in my proposal, which I filed with the board before installation, that the system is fully compliant. The fixtures are shielded, angled down at 45 degrees to prevent uplighting. The bulbs are 3-watt filament LEDs, not the 50-watt floods your own house uses. Mr. Croft, they have a color temperature of 2700 Kelvin, which is warm white, fully compliant with coastal dark sky recommendations. The nuisance you're citing is, in fact, dimmer and more environmentally sound than 90% of the houses in this association. Gus stood up, unasked. She's right, he boomed. Gus rarely spoke, so the room went silent. I'm a master electrician. I reviewed her plan. That installation is cleaner than a hospital operating room. It's professional. The complaint is technically baseless. Croft shuffled his papers. He was cornered on the facts. This was not the part he had prepared for. Well, the board received the complaint, and we must act. I understand, I said, my voice hardening. But why did you receive the complaint? You didn't receive one about Mr. Miller's blue, unshielded floodlights on Cove Road. You didn't receive one about the broken fixtures flickering on the gatehouse. You received one, very specific complaint, and it had nothing to do with light and nothing to do with noise. I turned and looked at Renata. Her smile was gone. The complaint was a personal vendetta, and you, Mr. Croft, used the power of this board to execute it for a friend. The room inhaled. That is a serious accusation, Ms. Rowan, Croft said, his voice rising. It's a serious accusation, I agreed, and I have serious evidence. I turned my laptop around and unmuted the speakers. This is a recording of a phone call from the morning after Christmas, with the complainant, Ms. Renata Vale. Please listen closely to the reason for her anger. I hit the spacebar. The room was dead silent, and then Renata's voice, tinny and full of screaming rage, filled the beige room. You can't just have that. You can't have muddy boots and grease under your fingernails in the picture. Manual labor belongs out of frame. It's just cleaner. The audio was horrifying in the quiet room. It was raw, ugly, and undeniable. I heard people gasp. I saw neighbors, the ones in their expensive sweaters, turn and stare at Renata. Her face, which had been so perfectly composed, was now a mask of white, stunned fury. It was in that precise, perfect, awful moment of silence that the door at the back of the hall opened. My father, Martin Rowan, walked in. He was late, of course. He'd clearly come to provide moral support, to be the picture of the concerned husband. He smiled his weak, placating smile at the room. And I, making eye contact with him from the front, hit the spacebar again. I replayed the last line. Manual labor belongs out of frame. It's just cleaner. My father froze in the doorway. He heard it. He heard his wife's poison. Raw and public. He saw every head in the room turn from him, to his wife, and then to me. He stood there, paralyzed. A man trapped out of frame, halfway in and halfway out. The perfect metaphor for his entire life. I let the silence hang for another second. Then I turned off the audio. As you can hear, I said, my voice dropping into the stunned quiet. The complaint was never about lights. It was about muddy boots. It was about the fact that I am an electrician. It was about my work. Renata was on her feet. This is an outrage. That was a private conversation. This is illegal. It's not, Celeste said, pulling at her mother's arm, her voice a low, panicked hiss. It's a one-party consent state. Mom, sit down. And it became a public matter, Ms. Vale, I said, my eyes locking on Celeste. When you and Mr. Croft conspired to use this board as your personal weapon, I plugged the cable into my laptop and hit the key. The hall's old projector whirred to life, displaying my laptop screen on the wall, displaying the email. Subject: Maintaining the family's image. From Renata Vale. To Harrison Croft. CC: Celeste Vale. And the damning replies from Croft. Consider it handled. From Celeste. Appreciate you handling this discreetly. The room erupted. People were standing up, shouting. A conflict of interest. She's his lawyer. They used the board. What the hell is this? Harrison? Celeste looked like she was going to be physically ill. She grabbed her laptop, her hands shaking. I was just CC'd. I was just looped in. She stammered, her legal composure shattering, revealing the terrified, privileged child underneath. Croft was banging his gavel, his face a deep, mottled red. Order! Order! This is a mischaracterization. This is a receipt. A new voice cut through the chaos. Grandma Evelyn. She hadn't stood. She didn't need to. She was sitting in the second row, holding aloft a single, faded piece of yellow carbon paper. Mr. Croft? She said, her voice carrying over the din. My name is Evelyn Rowan. You all seem to be very concerned about Tessa's aesthetic. You're worried about her lights. I'm worried about your memory. She stood up, walked forward, and placed the receipt on the projector, right on top of the email, so the whole room could see it. This is an invoice for $4,200, she announced, from last year's hurricane It's for an emergency panel replacement and a new ground wire at Mr. Martin Rowan's house, the one you get dues from, the one that was flooding. It was paid by Tessa Rowan. She did the work herself, in the middle of the storm, while the owners of the house were at a spa. She turned and faced the residents. You are trying to find the one person, the dirty laborer you heard, who actually saved one of your properties, the woman who keeps your lights on. She looked at Croft, her eyes like chips of ice. So, you go right ahead. Harrison, you tell us all again how blinding her lights are. I think if you're blinded by them, it's because your eyes were shut long before she ever flipped the switch. That was it, the checkmate. The room was silent, and then it turned. The residents, no longer just curious, were furious. They were furious at being used, at being part of this petty classist vendetta. Apologize, someone shouted from the back. Recall, shouted another. Nora Pike stood up. Harrison, we demand a public apology. Not from her, she pointed at Renata, but from you, for this gross, biased, and unprofessional handling of your authority. You abused our trust. You owe us an apology, and you owe Ms. Rowan one. Croft was trapped. His board members were looking at him in horror. His conspiracy was laid bare. He stared at the email, at the receipt, at my grandmother, at my father still frozen in the doorway. He looked at me, my face calm, my evidence secure. The board, he stammered, his voice choked. The board finds the complaint baseless. The violation notice is withdrawn. He swallowed, the picture of defeat. And I apologize to the residents and to Ms. Rowan for the handling of this matter. Renata grabbed her purse. She and Celeste, without a word, pushed through the crowd and fled. My father just deflated. He turned and disappeared back out the door he had just entered. I walked back to my seat. I gathered my papers. I unplugged my laptop. I had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like an exorcism. It felt like I had finally, after 10 years, pulled the right wire, and the whole faulty, dangerous, overloaded circuit had finally, and permanently, gone dark. The community hall emptied out quickly. The residents, buzzing with the nervous energy of a drama that had ended, filed out into the cold, casting long, curious glances at me. Gus came over and clapped me on the shoulder. A heavy, solid gesture that said more than a speech. Good work. Rowan, you held your ground. Aunt Moira hugged me, her eyes shining. You magnificent, wire-pulling badass. I'm buying you a steak. I'll take you up on that. I smiled, the expression feeling strange on my face. Grandma Evelyn just touched my arm. I'll see you at home, dear. I'm riding with Moira. We'll have tea. They left, a small cohort, leaving me to pack my laptop and the stack of evidence into my bag. I was alone in the beige room, the silence humming under the fluorescent lights. I clicked the latches on my bag, the sound sharp and final. I had won. The lights would stay. The HOA was in shambles, and Croft would likely be impeached. Renata and Celeste had fled. I pushed open the heavy side door of the hall. The parking lot was cold, a vast expanse of asphalt under a few tall, humming, sodium vapor lights that cast a sick yellow glow. The air was sharp and smelled like impending snow. My truck was one of the last cars there. My hand was on the door handle when a voice cut through the wind. Tessa. I froze. I didn't turn. I knew the voice. I had been waiting for it, in one way or another, my entire life. He was standing near the corner of the building, a shadow detached from the others. Martin Rowan, my father. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. His shoulders slumped inside his expensive overcoat. He looked old. He walked toward me, his shoes scraping on the pavement, stopping about 6 feet away, the safe distance. I heard, he said, his voice hollow. I came back, after I left. I stood in the hall. I heard the audio. I heard what she said. I turned. leaning my back against the cold metal of my truck door. I just looked at him. I had nothing left to say. I had laid all my wires bare. The circuit was his to complete, or to leave open forever. I had no idea, he stammered, his eyes darting around the empty lot, unable to land on me. No idea about what? Dad? My voice was flat, exhausted. The adrenaline was gone, leaving just the ache. No idea that she hit me, or that she said it out loud, or that I paid to save your house? The receipt, he said, shaking his head, as if trying to dislodge the image. I thought the insurance had covered. Renata told me she handled all that. She did, I said. She handled it. I was just the labor, the dirty hands that fixed the problem, in the middle of a hurricane, while you were at a spa. He flinched, as if I'd struck him. He tried to pivot, to find the footing he always used, the one that put the burden back on me. I never knew you felt this way, Tessa. You're always so strong, so self-sufficient. I always figured you were tough. I figured you didn't need. Need what? I cut him off, but I didn't raise my voice. It was worse than yelling. It was the calm of a disconnected line. Need you to be a father? Need you to stand up for me? Just once? I shifted my bag on my shoulder. Strong doesn't mean I don't need respect. Dad, strong is what I had to become because you chose to be weak. Strong is what happens when you leave a kid to raise herself. The words landed. There was no shield. He had no narrative to hide behind. The audio, the receipt, the public humiliation. He was exposed. He looked down, his face a mask of shame. And his eyes, for the very first time, landed on my hand. My hand, holding my truck key. The bruise, which had been fading for days, was now a sickly, ugly map of yellow and purple under the fluorescent parking lot light. The mark from the cardboard tube. The mark from Christmas morning. He saw it. It wasn't an abstract family narrative anymore. It wasn't just a spilled glass of wine on a white rug. It was a wound, his face, which had been pale with shame, crumpled. It was a slow, dawning, sickening realization. He connected the audio he'd heard in the hall to the physical evidence in front of him. She did that? He whispered, his voice cracking. He pointed a trembling finger at my hand. That was from the wrapping paper? On Christmas? Yes, I said. Oh, God, he breathed. He leaned back against the brick wall of the community center, pressing his hand to his mouth. He looked hollowed out, the curated, perfect life he had protected. The image he had enabled was a lie, and the proof of it was standing right in front of him. He pushed himself off the wall, trying to regain some semblance of control, of fatherhood. He found his old, familiar script. I'll talk to her, he said, his voice stronger but still shaky. I will handle this. I am going to speak to Renata. We will fix this. No. The single word stopped him cold. You don't get to handle this, I said, my voice low and final. You don't get to fix this. You don't get to talk to Renata for me. You've been doing that my whole life. You've been smoothing and cleaning and hiding. I opened my truck door, the interior light flashing on. I turned and looked at him, a man I barely knew. You need to talk to yourself. You need to figure out your truth. Dad, not hers, not mine, yours. And then you need to speak that, I'm done cleaning up your silence. I got into the truck. I closed the door, the solid thunk echoing in the empty lot. I started the engine. He just stood there, a ghost under the humming yellow light, watching me as I drove away. The drive back to Calder Cove was long. The win at the hearing felt distant, sour. The confrontation with my father hadn't felt like a victory. It felt like a final disconnection, like pulling the main service feed while the whole house was still drawing power, a dangerous, sparking, and necessary break. I parked in front of the Cliff House. The porch lights were on. My small, legal, triumphant string of lights. They glowed warm and steady. I sat in the truck for a full minute, just breathing, the sound of the engine ticking as it cooled. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I almost ignored it. I was so tired of the vibration. I was tired of the war. But I picked it up. It was Celeste. I braced myself for a new line of attack, for legal threats, for accusations. How dare you? You ruined us. But the text, on the illuminated screen, just said, "I'm sorry." I stared at it. Sorry. Not things got out of hand. Not you misunderstood. Not a curated press release. Just sorry. The hesitation. The 3 dots made it look real. I typed back, my thumb feeling heavy. Sorry for what? The 3 dots appeared on her screen. She was typing. She stopped. She started again. The message that came through was long. I'm sorry I let her do that. I'm sorry I was part of it. When I saw that email, with my name on it, up on that screen, I didn't even remember writing it. It's just what we do. We manage things. We protect the image. It's like a reflex. A new message buzzed immediately after. But when I was sitting there, and I heard what Mom said, manual labor out of frame, all I could think about was Miles. Miles, her new boyfriend, the one from the Christmas photo. I typed one word, Miles. My boyfriend, Miles, she wrote back, the text streaming in. The one Mom tolerated for the photos. His dad is a welder, a union welder, from Groton. He's been a welder for 30 years. Miles is so proud of him. He talks about him all the time. Another pause. And all I could think was, that's how she's going to see him. That's what she's going to do to him, to me. She's going to find a way to put his father out of frame. She's going to treat him, just like she treats you. The circuit completed. This wasn't just about me. Her apology was for her. It was the first crack in her own perfect, curated life. She had looked at me, the dirty daughter, and seen her own future. I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand. Everyone gets a seat. It was an easy thing to carve into wood. It was a hard thing to live. I typed back, "Do you want to come to dinner? Friday night, just you and Miles, if you want." I added a final, critical line. No photos, no narrative, just food. The reply was almost instantaneous. Yes. She didn't ask what to wear. She didn't ask who else would be there. She didn't ask what was on the menu. Just, yes. I finally got out of the truck and went inside. Grandma Evelyn was already asleep in the guest room. The house was quiet, safe. I walked onto the porch, my porch, and leaned against the rail. The wind was cold and clean, and it smelled of salt and distance. The current inside me, the one that had been running at a dangerously high voltage for 3 days, finally began to drop. The high-pitched, anxious hum in my veins was fading. The fight wasn't over. A system that's been wired wrong for 20 years doesn't get fixed in one night. Renata is still out there. My father is still a ghost, trapped in the hallway of his own life. But the reverse current had done its job. It had forced a change. It had tripped the main. The lights on the porch flickered for a second as a heavy gust of wind hit the cliff, but they held steady. They were grounded, and so was I. It was Celeste's text that came first. Mom wants to talk, at the house. Then, 10 minutes later, the official summons from Renata herself. Tessa, I believe it's time we met to discuss readjusting the family image, my house, tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Readjusting the family image, the language of marketing, of damage control. She was framing the public humiliation at the HOA hearing not as a defeat, but as a simple market correction. She still thought this was a narrative she could rewrite, that I was a plot point she could edit. I texted back one word, okay. I did not bring Grandma Evelyn. I did not bring an audio recorder. I brought myself. When I walked into my father's house, the house I had saved from flooding, it felt different. The air was still, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was the dead. pressurized quiet of a vacuum. Renata was waiting for me at the long, polished dining room table, the one that was always set, but never used. She was dressed in an impeccable cream-colored sweater, the picture of calm, controlled reason. In the center of the table, between two unlit candles, she had placed a single object, a new perfect, unopened roll of gold leaf wrapping paper. I stopped. I looked at the roll. It was identical to the one from Christmas morning. "I found a replacement," she said, her voice smooth and even. "The one you mishandled was from a special collection. You ruined the last of it." She was starting here, with the paper, with the idea that the paper was the victim, that the prop was the thing that had been violated. I walked to the table. I did not sit. I unclipped the tool from my belt. It was my cable splicing knife, the one with the heavy wooden handle worn smooth by my grip, the steel thick and curved, sharpened to a razor's edge. It was a tool, not a weapon. A tool for cutting away the useless insulation to get to the conductive, powerful core. I placed it on the polished wood, right next to her roll of paper. The contrast was absolute. Her fragile, shiny, superficial illusion, my solid, worn, functional truth. "I'm not here to cut paper, Renata," I said, my voice just as quiet as hers. "I'm here to cut the main line." Her composure flickered, a tiny, almost invisible tightening around her eyes. "I don't know what you mean." "You lost," I said. "You lost at the HOA. You lost in front of the neighbors. You lost Celeste. And you lost my father. And now you want to readjust the image. So you call me here, and you put a roll of paper on the table, and you want to start over. But you're starting with the wrong problem." "The problem," she said, her voice rising just a fraction, "is the pressure. The pressure to be perfect. Do you have any idea what it's like in this community, in our congregation? The judgment? The expectations? I have to manage everything, every single detail, or it all falls apart." "It already fell apart," I said. "It fell apart the moment you decided that a person was less important than a piece of paper." I was stressed. I was trying to create a beautiful memory, a perfect day. And you came in with your smell, and you don't care about the aesthetic. I need a real apology." I didn't shout. I just cut the wire of her rant. She stopped, her mouth open. "I don't need to hear about the pressure," I said. "I don't need to hear about the congregation. I need to hear you say you were wrong, not for the press, not for the image, for the record." I pulled out my phone. I set it on the table next to my knife. I didn't hit record. I just let it sit there. The black, reflective screen facing her, a mirror, a witness. "I need to hear you say you're sorry for hitting me." Renata's eyes darted from the phone to my face. She was cornered. And like any cornered animal, she lunged, not at me, but at the person she thought was still safe to blame. "Sorry?" she hissed, her mask of civility disintegrating. "I was stressed. He was stressed. Martin, he was just as upset about the mess. He was the one who what, Renata?" A new voice, from the kitchen doorway. "My father. He wasn't in a suit. He was in a rumpled gray sweatshirt and jeans. He looked exhausted. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. He had been in the kitchen the entire time, listening." Renata's face went white. She had been caught, mid-lie, by the very person she was trying to use as a shield. My father walked slowly into the dining room. He didn't look at Renata. He looked at the table, at the roll of paper, at my heavy steel knife, at my phone, and then he looked at me. "She's right," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You're trying to blame me, to put it on me. And you're right, it was on me." He turned to me, his eyes finally, meeting mine. There was no narrative left in them, just a vast, hollowed-out shame. "You're right," he said again, stronger this time. "I was the one. I stood there. I watched her. I watched the paper, and the wine, and I looked at the mess on the rug." He took a deep breath, and I said, "Clean it. I said that. To you. He shook his head, a gesture of profound self-disgust. It was the wrong word. It was the wrong choice. I've been saying clean it my whole life. To you, to myself, about everything, and I was wrong. He turned to Renata. And this was the moment, the reverse current. I let you, he said, his voice low, but carrying a new, cold weight. I let you build this set, this house. I let you turn our lives into a photo shoot. I let you curate my own mother, my own daughter, out of the picture. He gestured to the wrapping paper. You care more about this illusion, than about the real, living people in your house. You're obsessed with the frame. He pointed a shaking finger at her. I let this house run on illusions. I let it run on shadows and aesthetics, and your rules, I let it run on paper, not on truth, not on electricity, not on anything real. Silence. Renata stared at him. The man who had been her silent, complicit partner for a decade was gone. In his place was this stranger, this man in a sweatshirt, who had just torn down the set with his bare hands. From the hallway, a small sound. Celeste. She was standing there, her arms wrapped around herself, shaking. She had come to see the readjustment too. She looked at her mother, at her stepfather, and then at me. And she walked, slowly, deliberately, and stood a few feet behind me. Renata was alone. She was surrounded, on all sides, by the truth. She looked at Martin. She looked at Celeste. She looked at me. Her face, for the first time since I had known her, was blank. The director had no more lines. The curator had nothing left to arrange. She let out a single, long, shuddering breath. It was the sound of a system that had been overloaded for years, finally, and catastrophically, failing. It was not a sigh of concession. It was a sigh of utter, complete deflation. She didn't know whether to fight or to fold, or to simply cease to exist. I had come for a final cut, and here it was. I picked up my knife. I slid it back into its sheath. I picked up my phone. I'm having dinner tomorrow night, I said, my voice cutting through the stillness. At my house, a real dinner. I looked at Martin. I looked at Celeste. You're both invited. I looked at Renata. She was still just staring. A woman made of wrapping paper, suddenly exposed to the rain. I'm inviting all of you, I said. A dinner with no cameras, no narrative. I walked to the door. There's a seat for you, too, Renata, if you choose to take it. I left them there, the three of them, trapped in the quiet, perfect room, with the roll of gold paper, and the truth, and the empty, awful silence. The next night, the table at the Cliff House was set. I had cooked a simple roast chicken. The smell of rosemary and thyme filled the warm room. There were 4 of us, me, Grandma Evelyn, my father, Martin, and Celeste. We sat at the long oak table, the sound of the ocean a quiet rhythm outside the glass. It was a simple dinner. We just ate. There was a 5th chair, at the end of the table, near the door. It was empty. I had put it there, but I hadn't expected anyone. At 7:30, well after we had started eating, there were headlights on the gravel. We all stopped. Even the conversation, which had been halting and careful, went silent. I saw my father look down at his plate. Celeste froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. The front door opened slowly, without a knock. Renata. She was not the woman from the HOA meeting, or the woman from the dining room. Her hair was pulled back. She was wearing a simple dark coat. Her hands were empty, except for one single object. She was carrying the roll of gold leaf wrapping paper. She didn't have her purse. She didn't have her phone. She certainly didn't have a camera. She stood in the doorway, framed by the cold night, the warm light of my house spilling out onto the porch around her. She looked at the 4 of us at the table. We looked at her. She walked in, closed the door, and slowly, deliberately, walked to the table. She placed the roll of wrapping paper on the wood, next to the empty chair, a symbol, a white flag, a testament, a surrender. Then she sat down in the empty chair. No one spoke. My father was staring at the paper. Renata's hands were trembling, just slightly. She looked at me, her eyes red, but dry. She started. Her voice was rough, a sound I had never heard from her. I'm sorry. It was a terrible, clumsy, ugly word from her mouth. It was imperfect. It was choked. I'm sorry, she said again, stronger. For hitting you, Tessa, with the paper. She touched the roll. I was wrong. There is no pressure. That makes that okay. It was cruel, and I am sorry. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't for a congregation. It was unconditional. My father let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a decade. He looked at me, his eyes full of a pain I finally recognized. I chose silence, he said, his voice quiet, but clear in the small room. For years, I chose. Clean it up. I chose making it easy for me. Instead of making it right for you, I chose being comfortable over being respectable. And I am so sorry for that. Tessa, that is my failure, not hers, mine. The truth, all of it, finally, laid bare on the table, right next to the salt and the pepper. I stood up. I went to the bookshelf, the one with my NFPA manuals. On the bottom shelf, there was a simple, wooden box. I brought it to the table and opened it. It wasn't a weapon, it was a logbook. I took out the first item, a photograph. Me, in a full rain slicker, harnessed to the roof of a neighbor's house during the hurricane, pulling a new service line. I laid it on the table. I took out the next, the faded, yellow carbon copy of the $4,200 receipt from my father's house. I laid it next to the photo. I took out the last, a stack of small, handwritten notes. Thank yous from neighbors. From Nora. From the small diner downtown, whose walk-in I had rewired for free when they were struggling. Tessa, you're a lifesaver. Tess, the lights are beautiful. Thank you for the light. This, I said, my hand flat on the evidence, is my narrative. This is my image. It's not a performance. It's not a prop. It's proof. I looked at all of them. Light is either something you talk about, or it's something you do. Celeste, who had been silent, finally spoke. Her voice was small. That's why he was so proud. We all looked at her. My boyfriend, Miles, she said, looking at me. I told him what happened, all of it. I told him about his dad being a welder, and I told him I was afraid of becoming her. She glanced at Renata, afraid of looking at his hands and seeing dirty, and he just listened. She took a shaky breath, and he said, my dad built the frame of a hospital. He built things that save people, and he said he was proud of my narrative too, my legal work, but only if I wanted to break the pattern. He said, he was glad I met you. She looked at me, her eyes swimming. Because of you, I want to break it. I looked at the table, at my family, this broken, messy, imperfect, and now, finally, honest group of people. I pointed to the sign I had carved, the one hanging by the door. Everyone gets a seat, I said, my voice thick. It's the rule of the house, but the rule has a condition. I looked at Renata, at my father. The seats at this table are for people who respect the table. They're for people who respect the work it took to build it. Renata looked at the roll of wrapping paper. Then she looked at me. Can I, she said, her voice hesitant. Can I hang this? In the storage room? The empty one? I wasn't sure what she meant. The cardboard tube, she clarified. After the paper is gone, I want to hang the empty roll, to remind myself that you don't turn people into props. It was the most honest, strangest, and most perfect request I had ever heard. I nodded. Yeah, I said. Yeah, you can. I stood up. I felt light. The circuit was complete. The load was balanced. I walked out onto the porch, leaving them at the table. The night air was cold, clean, and full of the roar of the ocean. I looked at my string of lights, the ones that had started this whole thing, the ones I had won the right to keep. I walked over to the wall, where I had installed the new dimmer switch. I put my hand on it. I pushed it, just slightly. The lights on the porch dimmed, shifting from a bright, welcoming light to a low, soft, intimate glow. They were no longer a beacon of defiance. They were just warm. The sound of the ocean, the waves crashing and pulling back, filled the silence. It sounded, in that moment, exactly like applause. I stood there, in the soft light of the house I had built, and looked back through the glass. I saw the table, my grandmother, my father, my sister, my stepmother. It wasn't perfect. It was scarred. It was a mess. But every single chair was full, and for the first time in my life, it was completely, painfully, and beautifully honest. I whispered it, to the ocean, to the night, to the part of my grandfather I hoped was still out there. The circuit is closed. Thank you so much for listening to the story. We'd love to know where you're tuning in from. So drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give us some extra support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.